Hey everyone, this is Michael Angel with CDSoundMaster, and I'm excited to be doing this video. It's long overdue. Several months ago, I worked on a video to show you a multi-track session just using Tape Booster Plus and nothing else. And what I wanted to show is how it helps to give you that instant compression sound, even just used on its own, not even in coordination with R2R and or the Apex tape collection. So even using just Tape Booster Plus on its own without the R2R machines or without the Apex machines, even when using Tape Booster Plus on its own, you get that instant compression sound and you have a lot of control over real tape harmonics driving the signal. But the purpose of the video is to let you hear it with a real mix and doing no EQ, no compression, no other changes to the mix. Just kind of setting up the tracks the way that I think sound good and then giving you exactly the same mix with one instance of Tape Booster Plus, another instance, etc., etc., etc. So in that video, I apologize for the delay, by the way. In that video, I expressed that the next video that came along, I was going to show you the subtle differences that you get when driving individual tracks to tape. Because every instrument is so different. And what's great about using a song like this from my friend Gary, who's with the Black Dogs, this is their song, and he has completely authorized this for use, is that you have, for instance, you have the kick, which is a very quick, transient sound, but has a lot of energy in the low end and sometimes mids and highs. You have a kick in and out, so sometimes you get more air in one of them and more mid-rangey click in the other, but still that quicker transient. You have bass, which obviously is usually in the low end, but might have some strong mid-frequency energy as well. But with the bass, you tend to have more sustaining sounds, so you're going to notice a saturation element that is more note and a natural overtone to the notes that are there. And then when you get into the guitars, obviously they are running through their own distortion. So you're wanting to listen to what it does to the actual playing, to the actual player's feel, and to those harmonics that may already be there, whether there's crunch or sustain and all those types of things. So it's really great to hear the balance when the harmonics are interjecting that effect individually on those things. How is it different from when you just put it over the whole mix? So first of all, you don't want to harm your peaks when you're trying to get that tape sound, unless you're literally trying to combine your tape and compression effect all together, which I feel is a great general overall approach. But the reason that I initially designed things the way that I did is to give you the ultimate in decision-making, your ultimate diversity in tape sound. If you have a collection of R2R machines, of course, there are subtle differences, sometimes not so subtle differences from tape speed to the differences in the actual machines. But with Tape Booster Plus, you're going through an extremely realistic effect that all of these machines share with one another, matched to the fact that Nebula and this Aqua technology, this specific type of convolution, Volterra vectorial kerneling, tends to work best within a certain range, meaning that it's ultra realistic if you do it right, if you've captured the source correctly within a certain range. If you try to go outside of that range, you reach an unrealistic expectation on CPU. It's just simply too much to keep the length of the chunks of data long and accurate. But also, if you try to reduce those to make it more CPU friendly, to add more harmonics and more layers of distortion and all this kind of stuff, then you're really losing the benefit of somebody just going in and hand picking, hand programming each level on their own. So I really worked with the window of what makes the most sense with Nebula, which also means that adding instances to one another is really the easiest way to just kind of stack the effect on and to get more and more of the effect without it ever becoming less real. So lots of words to say cool stuff. So what I'm going to do with the session this time, I'm going to let you hear the dry signals. I'm keeping the same mix. What I'm going to do is I'm going to apply 1, 2, 4, and 8 instances of Tape Booster Plus to each individual track. I'll let you hear the tracks, individual dry, as we go along, and then I will blend them together after they've been processed. And the only changes to the balance of the mix will make sure that nothing is overloading. So you're going to hear a before and after that continues to be balanced to the same degree. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to solo the kick in and do my one instance. And I'm going to go through kick out, snare top, under, etc., etc. I'm going to do each of those at 1. I'm going to go through and do each of those at 2. And I'm just going to continue that way. And I'm going to name them according to the same. So starting with kick in. So everybody out there, don't worry. Yes, I do know that batch rendering is very quick and very easy, much easier than what you're seeing here. I figured this may be the one time that I actually go through the process to show the difference between rendering a project with Tape Booster Plus and rendering every individual track with Tape Booster Plus. And as you can imagine, this applies to using consoles on every channel, using tubes on every channel, and especially when you take lots of subtle things and put them in the signal chain, which is the true analog nature of the things that I believe in. So don't worry, I did this purely for the science of the process, for the visuals to show you that I literally did go through, 36 times, and render each of these dry, 1 instance of Tape Booster Plus, 2 instances, 4 instances, 8 instances. And yes, I am finally done. I realized there must be something wrong with me to go through that process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a fresh session with the mix dry, and then in succession I'm going to let you see and hear a mix of each of these tracks dry blended together. So we'll listen A-B for all this different stuff. So, in the name of being precise, in the name of science, what I have done is I took the section of the song from the Black Dogs, Osmosis Jam, and I did a dry mix. So I have all of the dry blended together. Then I did a mix of the dry, actually rendering each individual solo track at the volume that I have selected for the mix. You know, I have a basic overall mix of the levels that I like. I rendered all of those separately and then put them on their own tracks to compare to the dry mix, because the first video was dry mix and using a single instance all the way up to 8 instances of Tape Booster Plus on the dry mix. Now we're doing individual tracks, so I have to show the comparison of dry individual tracks at the volumes that they were created versus rendered individual tracks at the same volume, taking all the steps so you don't have to. So first I'm going to go ahead and let you hear the full mix on the individual tracks just dry. So now I'm going to solo each one. We have the kick in, which you can hear has that nice kind of papery, clicky mid-range. It's a very natural sound of the beater directly on the head, which is what you would expect to hear from that mic. Then the kick out, which is on the outside of the drum, and you can have 2 drum heads, one on the in, one on the out, one that's directly being hit and one that's not. Or you can have an open side on the other side, in which case, usually if you have it open, you also have a pillow. It just depends. But this is what we would expect to hear, that kind of lower boomy sound. The low end has had a chance to develop through a little bit of distance, since the low frequencies are longer sound waves, and we're further away from the beater, so you get the impact, the whoosh, the air of the kick drum. So now the snare top, which One would assume probably an SM57, 1 to 3 inches off the head. Get a lot of the good stick sound and a little bit of the ringing from the top head. What you want to hear from the under, or the snare bottom, is probably more of a high, almost bristly kind of sound from the snare that's actually a physical snare touching the bottom head of the snare drum, and you get a little bit of the brightness to add to the pop of the stick sound. So there you go. That's exactly what you expect to hear. So then the overheads, I just have a close, large diaphragm condenser. So obviously this is where you're getting your cymbals from this mix. So then we have the direct inject, or the direct input of the bass, which you can hear a lot more of the string and pickup action, and a little bit less of the boom. You know, you don't hear the impact of the speaker and kind of growing the signal and the electronics that get in the way. So now we have the bass being mic'd from the cabinet with an SM57. So you can hear more of the boominess and the note of the bass, less of the playing action. But you also hear the bleed through. And just one note, if you're thinking in terms of recording a live band and you want to try to get better separation on this kind of thing, you can always turn the bass cabinet in the opposite direction away from the guitar cabinet, even if it's just at a V, not at a total opposite directions. Also keeping in mind that you might be in a small room with reflections, so you could, if you play with the angles a little bit, you might find that you accidentally push the sound back in at other angles, and then you start getting bleed through in other places. So that may not always be the right action. But you can also place a physical dampening divider, even several moving blankets. Often you can buy them from recording resources that will just charge you more for a moving blanket because it's soundproofing. But you know, think of creative ways that you want to cut bleed through. In this case, it doesn't really have any negative effects. That, I mean, you know, we're getting some guitar bleed through and it doesn't really matter that much. So then we have the direct E906 from the guitar, and I've got that panned a little bit to the left, and then the guitar cabinet direct off of the speaker with an SM57. So you hear a little bit more of the harmonics and the electronics, whereas you have a little bit more of a gritty direct. You can hear the playing from the left, from the direct connection. So that's how they sound together. So bringing everything back in. So as you can see, here we have the mix, the dry mix, and then as I showed you, I've rendered out the kick in, out, snare, top, under, large diaphragm condenser overhead, the bass direct inject or direct input, the mic'd cab, the guitar and guitar. And so the idea is that this separate mix at the volume levels should match letting the engine of the program render them all together. So we will see. Okay, so we should see those same volumes as it gets closer to that one snare hit that's louder than the others. We should see negative 3.7 again. Over here. Okay, so to my ears and to the volume levels, everything is looking and sounding correct. So, and this is not meant to be a perfect mix. This is meant to for the demonstration of all of this, to give us a really good balance of hearing the lows, the highs, the fast transients, the slow transients, everything panned left and right, all those different fun things. So now we're going to look at the effect of balancing these levels, within plus or minus half a decibel, let's say. This is my arbitrary setting of all the tape booster pluses chained in serial to one another. So we're going to look for that peak of around negative 3.7 decibels again and see if I balanced them out. Well, this is one instance of tape booster plus. Okay, so if we listen a little bit, I'm going to go to the middle point, just, so we always have the same reference. You're literally hearing one after the other. This is actually a tiny bit quieter, just, less than half a decibel quieter. But I'm going to let you hear dry to one instance. Okay, so now I'll just go from that same place. We'll see what the peaks are doing at 2 instances of tape booster plus. Okay, so we still have, instead of negative 3.7, we have negative 4.1. But I've also noticed that the negative 7.5 decibel lower average has come up almost a decibel. So we're seeing that effect where even though the peaks, the relationship of the low and the high peaks and the averages are all exactly the same, but they're kind of coming together to meet one another. So I think that's interesting. So now let's listen to the 4 instances. This is certainly going to be noticeably different. Okay, with that, there was about a 2 decibel difference of everything lower than the average of the volume, and our peak is now just slightly about a half decibel louder than where it should be at. So at some point, I'm going to adjust these out and get it more accurate. So now let's see what the 8 instances are, which my guess is that it might even be closer to negative 1. Okay, so this actually peaked at negative 1.2, so we would actually want to bring that whole thing down until the peak was at negative 3.7 for from the loudness down for us to have a balance to go to. So anyway, we see the mix, dry, the multiple instances on the separate tracks, just listening to it as a coming out of the engine. And so here's the finals. I have balanced them to normalize negative 1 decibel just for the sake of hearing. So now let's look and listen at these 4 compared to the dry. So I'm actually looking at the right hits a peak of negative 1.2, and I noticed that the low parts were averaging somewhere around negative 5-ish with a peak of negative 1.2. So now let's see with 1 instance. Okay, so an average of negative 5 decibels is now brought up to somewhere around negative 4 decibels with the same peak at negative 1.2. Okay, so the low to mid average is around negative 3.2 now with the same peak at negative 1.2. Let's see with 4 instances. So about negative 2.4 decibels for the low average and negative 1.2 and 8 instances. I bet there's not going to be a whole lot of a difference there. Yeah, there's now about a half a decibel difference between what used to be the lowest and the higher. Now, this is not just volume changes. These are the interharmonic distortion that is intentionally coming from the even and odd harmonics from the tape. So let's just listen back and forth to all of them one after the next. So now you have heard the difference from all of those in a chain together. So what I'm going to do in just one separate video from this is I'm going to then compare all of these instances where I have placed Tape Booster Plus individually on each separate track and blended them together, and go to the original where I just did this process 8 times, but I did it on the entire track each time. So we will see there's probably going to be subtle differences in those two, and what does that do? I'll also take a look at it, just the bigger waveform in WaveLab, so we can really kind of see the peaks close up. So thank you so much for going through this wonderfully fun process with me. And if you would please like, subscribe, share, comment, and thank you so much, and God bless you. Bye for now.